From driverless cars to tracking climate change to diagnosing diseases, artificial intelligence is changing our world. But what about the ethical and moral problems it raises? Welcome to Roundtable. Hello and a very warm welcome from me, David Foster. If a driverless car is about to crash, what should it do? Protect the driver or the people in the other vehicle or the pedestrian? Just one example of the ethical puzzles raised by artificial intelligence.
We are at the dawn of the fourth industrial revolution. Artificial intelligence, also known as AI, is machine learning that is able to perform tasks that ordinarily require human intelligence. And societies are only just beginning to understand the ethics surrounding it. A study of UK tech workers found that 90% consider technology a force for good, but 59% of those working in AI said they had worked on projects they felt might be harmful to society. 18% of tech workers say they have quit jobs due to ethical concerns over AI. Some tech companies have created ethics committees, but there is concern about the lack of oversight in this cutting-edge area of technology. American billionaire and advisor to Donald Trump, Stephen Schwarzman, has given Oxford University its largest single donation since the Renaissance to investigate the ethics of artificial intelligence. The $188 million gift from Mr. Schwarzman is reported to be the biggest ever single donation to a UK university. Oxford University's new Institute for Ethics in AI will explore questions affecting the workplace and society in the quest for AI that everyone can trust.
Very pleased to say that joining me at the round table we have James Kingston from Cognition X, a company which tries and it believes manages to help us understand AI. Inma Martinez joins us again, digital scientist who specialises in artificial intelligence, and Adriano Koshiyama, an AI researcher at University College London. If you three don't know what's going on in the world of artificial intelligence, then nobody will. So thank you very, very much indeed. Inma, why do we need ethics here?
I think it's because AI is moving from automation to creating services that humans use. And therefore, those services have to be fair, they have to be protective of consumer laws, etc., etc. That's why the ethics come into place. Some companies are concerned that if automation comes to the workplace, some people may lose their jobs. Is that an ethical thing to do? So the ethics is now the big, dilemma, the big scenario for AI.
I mentioned morals in the introduction as well. They're not quite the same as ethics. Ethics seem to be laws. Morals are things within ourselves that we help to use to help navigate our way through society and through life. Are we talking about morals as well here, James?
I would certainly argue that we are. I think a broad distinction you can draw between morals and ethics is that ethics is all about the rules and principles that you set in place to guide a particular system or person's behavior. But underlying those, I think, has to be morals, a sense of what's right and wrong and that you think drives those. So yes, certainly.
Do the machines decide what's morally correct in the end, or do we decide for the machines?
I think it's very important that we remember that we are the people who create these machines. These systems are human artifacts, and therefore we need to be clear on the rules we want to set for them. To simply say, the machine decided isn't good enough. We have to have human accountability.
And we'll get into who pays the price if machines make mistakes in a little bit, if we will. But this presupposes that the machines are taking instructions from us. Is there not going to come a time, Adriano, when the machines make their own decisions?
Yeah, definitely. I can see this happening. And I think if we start to embed ourselves in the machines gradually, maybe because we start to track ourselves more, or because we give away some of our free will to the machine. So when we get into a Uber driverless car, and it takes us from point A to point B, completely decided by the machine and not by us, what's the optimal route for that? We are giving away something, and we're not taking the steering wheel. And I see this thing gradually happening over and over, and it's just going to go to other areas like finance, healthcare, and so on. So,
but let's talk about the moral aspect of this, because let everybody chip in on this one. Let's go back to driverless cars. The example I gave at the beginning was if a machine, which is a driverless car, decides between a pedestrian and a passenger and or the driver, how will it know what is the right decision to make morally, ethically?
So machines right now, especially cars, are not programmed to take moral decisions. But let's assume that they will. It will be dependent on whomever created the code of conduct for the machine. Somebody, when programming the machine to learn from circumstances and future scenarios, will have embedded, and if you were to be in that circumstance, this is how you choose. Or create a model and a functionality by which the machine will reach that conclusion. But the conclusion and the assumptions are programmed by a human.
But it has to be instinctive, doesn't it, sometimes? And the machine cannot be instinctive. If I'm driving down the road and I come across, let's say, a wild animal crossing the road, it's instinctive to try and avoid that, but I might equally crash into a car on the other side of the road. Instinct comes into it, and instinct is something that's learned through practice and by upbringing. Where do you go with that?
Well, I would suggest on the practice point, it depends precisely upon the nature of the computer system in place, but the machine, the car in question could have digitally practiced many millions of times and be aggregating the lessons learned by other systems, machines, cars that have been out in the wild already. As for the upbringing question, I mean, this to me, it just seems it's all about the person who's setting the rules of the system. One particular interesting idea that's come out is that actually, rather than attempting for the designer of the machine to set all of the rules, you allow the driver or the human user of the car to set a set of preferences around the extent to which they prioritize the safety of the person in the car versus people on the road or indeed animals. And that's a potential way of handing it back.
Somebody's playing God here, though, aren't they?
yeah, definitely. And I think the big issue is who is setting the rules. And to be honest with you, for the people who are in the forefront, who are these data scientists, and they are building all these machines for us, it's still not very clear what set of principles you should follow, and then it becomes ad hoc. So the person who is behind the computer is making this decision for us.
So you believe that in the end, machines will make their own decisions. How will we know that they're making the right decisions?
Well, that's
How do we control them, in fact?
Well, I think we probably have to participate as a society into that, definitely. And I'm not sure whether we should set regulatory bodies for that. I'm not completely bought into this idea. But I think there has to be some degree of surveillance for us, because we need to make the systems more fair, more accountable, more explainable, so we can understand what's going on. And I think so far we still don't have a good idea on how to make them.
Okay, we will get into things like the loss of jobs, inequality, and so on in just a moment. But I want to bring in James Lovelock. We did invite him to come on the program. He's 100 now, or just coming up to 100. The guy who put forward the Gaia hypothesis about the survival of our planet. And he says in the new book, cyborgs will rule the world by the end of the century, but don't worry, they will need us. So he's suggesting these aren't machines, Inma, but they are sort of emotional and intelligent creatures.
Yes, we should probably define what a cyborg is. And a cyborg comes from robotics, and it means a humanoid robot of intelligence. That's a cyborg. But the world...
Humanoid in the sense of it looks like.
It looks like a human.
Yeah.
But the future, and especially in 100 years, will literally have other machine intelligence running many other things, just like it does right now. For example, electricity companies manage their grid with AI, so that they know exactly where they need to supply more watts and less. That's run by AI, especially in the energy sector.
But let's get back to the cyborg, which is effectively a machine dressed up to look like a human. Therefore, it is just a machine in the same way that the one used by the electricity company is a machine. They will run the world by the end of this century.
I literally am puzzled as to how he's having that nightmare. I, as a scientist, don't have it, because I just want to understand why cyborgs are not machines that look like IBM computers. I mean, where does the cyborg come from? I think it's a really naive approach about what the future really looks like.
Sorry, in a moment, James, but where's the naivety here?
Because it's a bit of a fictional world that we have seen in books and movies, Terminator, the robots. And I'm asking why cyborgs are not a machine that looks, for example, like the column in Kubrick, which is the Hull computer, is a
2001.
rectangle.
Yeah, but what difference does it make whether they
Exactly.
look like
Why
humans,
a
but
cyborg-
he's saying they're going to rule the world, whether they happen
I
to look
would
like
to understand.
humans or whether they look like anything else on the planet, or nothing else on the planet.
I think where it comes from is the fear that non-AI people have as to, well, if the machines are reaching a notional level in which they're taking decisions by themselves, wouldn't they at some point go against us? That is paranoia 101. And this is why in the present, all of us that work in AI, plus governments, plus corporations that have been running AI systems for many, many years, since the 90s, we know that it's all about controlled environments and literally knowing what force brute computing is versus neural network intelligence that eventually begins to be a bit of a creative item. I think it's extremely propagandistic to write something like that in a book.
Okay, maybe scaremongering
in 2020.
in your view. Oh, let's give a plug for the book, Novice in the Coming Age of Hyperintelligence, by James Lovelock and Brian Appleyard. James, sorry, I did cut you off. What did you want to say?
Oh, I was merely going to back up that particular point. We have this deep urge, it seems, in the culture to represent AI as embodied, like a human, and often to speak of it as though it's a single unitary technology, and perhaps a single unitary single unitary intelligence in one embodied form, like us. This just isn't true. It would be,
Yet.
lots of different algorithms disaggregated in multiple different places.
It isn't true yet, or it will never be true?
We do have machines that are humanoid. For example, we have other intelligent machines that we use, for example, in the International Space ship. We have robots that actually are floating because if they have legs and they need to manage themselves, it's really hard to run them. And they are being tested to interact with the astronauts, for emotional support, not just tasks. So in the future, maybe the robots are floating balls that are super intelligent, but not cyborgs.
But they're not going to take over the world, as James Lovelock suggests, but keep us because they need us as servants in a way.
Well, certainly there are some thinkers who propose this at great length. So, for instance, Nick Bostrom worked a lot on this, on superintelligence. Max Tegmark's also thought about this in Life 3.0, and then their respective research institutions have looked at this at great length. Although I think most of the fears around quote-unquote superintelligence taking over and destroying humanity more come from the idea that it would just accidentally do it whilst in pursuit of some other goal. Rather than being the kind of malevolent force that you see in, The Matrix.
Could we, as a human race, ensure that if it is scientifically possible, it doesn't actually come to pass?
Well, there's a lot of research in the AI safety field going into particular ways that one can have control mechanisms over increasingly superintelligent systems. There's also a lot of thought going into governance structures for research organizations and then upon the international sphere, to make sure there's reporting and sharing of information in case an intelligence starts going out that way. But what I'd really like to highlight, though, is whilst this is a really interesting section of the AI ethics field, it's only one section. A lot of the more urgent problems are around accountability, power.
Okay, let's go there now. I mean, what do you think the most important issue is?
So, I think, to my mind, the most important issues are around, people talk a lot about unfair bias, how the training data used by a machine can often not take fully into account social unfairness in the world as it previously is, that you're now...
We're talking about discrimination.
Discrimination,
Yep.
Yes. Explainability. So when a machine, possibly an autonomous system such as the cars that you mentioned, takes a decision, can we see why it did so? Because often they use deep neural networks, which have many, many layers and are quite difficult to mathematically disentangle. So that's a big question. To my mind, actually, though, personally speaking, the largest questions are around really privacy and power. What data is being taken from people? How is that being used? What new power relationships does this mean between an individual person and a company that's using AI? And what's the new sort of politics of that in the future?
Adriano.
I think I'm concerned in two levels.
Yeah.
One is, I think, for a more philosophical principles level, which is, I think we are going to have to start to debate whether we want to have more AI intervention on our lives, like we had with the state intervention in our lives, versus our own freedom. So how much we want to give away for that. So that's kind of a more discussion more for the historians and philosophers and society in general. And it's very funny because in this case will be state versus individual versus companies. So it's a tripartite instead of being state versus individual. So it's a big discussion. And I think the second discussion is, for instance, when I was trained to be a data scientist like 10 years ago, most of the time I was spending time trying to make models cheaper, better, quicker. And for our current standards, it's just rubbish these days because we need to think beyond that, beyond performance. We need to think about explainability, we need to think about fairness, and we need to think about robustness.
All of which is under the umbrella of making these machines safe.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you need to have this holistic point of view.
And do you think that governments, and it's hard to generalize, I know, but governments that are working on developing these systems, if you like, are up to speed with what needs to be done? I know Finland is often quoted as a good example. What has it done?
Well, I don't know much about the Finland model.
Yeah.
One
Maybe
thing,
somebody can help with that one
Yeah.
in just a moment, but carry on.
No, I was just thinking about, for instance, the Chinese
Yeah.
Government, which has this mixed relationship with the companies, and they are somehow very aware about the social media, payment systems, etc. And I think the Russia and United States are very good on the defense aspect of AI.
Yeah, I'm thinking more about sort of making these machines accountable, building ethics into the laws around it. And Finland, does anybody want to bring up Finland, or maybe I'll pick
Yeah,
an example?
Finland published in December 2018 a new policy that is meant to create awareness for companies developing AI in Finland as to the typical ethics that they should bear in mind, and what will the government consider that they are in breach or not of creating a fairer society in Finland. And Finland is one of the countries where AI has been developed for many decades. And therefore is not a surprise that they came up with this sort of new environment and framework for the future development, because it's a society like Estonia that is super digital. Electronic passports, digitalization of identity. So they see that this is a step forward to start creating a consensus as to how it should be developed for the Finnish society.
And from what you understand about the Finnish model, is that something perhaps that other countries are looking to and seeing as a blueprint?
Indeed, Denmark, Estonia, all of these working groups within the European Technology Board have been presented as models for other countries to consider. I'm off to Malaysia to actually bring all of these to the Malaysian government, because they want to understand that if they're going to super digitalize government services, they need to take into account these type of models. So it's something that is cascading to other countries.
There's been a number of countries have started putting out ethical codes, having governmental studies into broad practices around AI and AI responsible ethics. France, Britain, China.
Even the United States, there's also a bill passing through the Congress now.
Yeah. We come back to the question, if somebody's going to lay down a set of rules, that person has to be ethically and morally, or those people have to be ethically and morally responsible themselves. So we can't guarantee that, can we?
No, and it's morally is something that is connected to cultural. For example, assisted death is a normal occurrence in Holland, whereas in other countries like here, it would be something unthinkable, is being fought against. And those are the morals. So in the future, certain countries will find that it's perfectly okay to crash the car against a deer on the road. And maybe in Scandinavia, if they're running out of deers and they're a protected species, the car will try to avoid them. So
I found a list of 9 of the ethical issues around here. So it's entirely subjective. You can't say these are the only ones. But unemployment, what happens after the end of jobs? If we succeed with the transition to machines, AI, one day we might look back and think it was barbaric that human beings were required to sell the majority of their waking time just to be able to live.
absolutely agree.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Absolutely agree.
Yeah. And I
So
think-
these machines are going to make us wealthy and indolent, lazy?
No, I don't think so. I think it's going to be, for instance, it's going to be unthinkable to have there was a human behind the steering wheel of a car. It's a bit like you're putting a human, driving a missile or something like that. It was just unthinkable. Like, why didn't put a machine in the first place to do that?
But don't we need jobs? Don't we need work to make ourselves feel worthwhile, to fulfill
I think so.
our own expectations?
I think.
I know this is a slightly different discussion, isn't it? But
Yes, but I think even if we, you have varying levels of controversy about how much job losses and within what time space people predict for large economies. But let's say we talk about some of the more out there ideas where people say 95% or 100% of the jobs will, as we currently know them, will disappear in the next 50 years. Say, I think people will still find new forms of if you like, job, i.e. new forms of activity that enable themselves to gain meaning and perhaps have
so it's
some
jobs
sort of
as we know it, as opposed to work.
Yeah,
Yeah.
jobs that
Yeah.
require people to run heavy computational force brute approaches, or for example, to achieve perfect vision or perfect, for example, in the medical world, in the very, very near future, I'm giving you 5 years, you will want a machine to tell you if there is a cancer mark on your results, not a doctor. Because the human eye is so imperfect. So all of the lab works results or looking at plaques, you will want a machine to detect anything, not a human eye. And that's a value for society.
One of the other headings here is, what is it? Artificial stupidity. How do we guard against mistakes?
Well, we need to prepare benchmarks. We need to have a good set of standards. And we need to use the machines to correct all the machines. That's the only way forward. If we try to do human intervention, it's not scalable enough. And the direction forward is to have more machines coming up with more decisions, and we need to have other machines.
Which leads us to who would be accountable if a machine made a mistake.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a totally uncharted world, isn't it?
It's an uncharted world, but I think we have to go down this way, and I don't see any way back.
One solution that has been proposed for this problem is if you really can no longer have human accountability, as we currently understand it, at any rate, if you have a machine making a machine that makes another machine that potentially does something wrong, then what do you do? One solution is to actually give each of those machines some form of legal personality, with which you could then attach...
What was the adjective? What sort of personality?
Legal personality.
Legal
I
personality.
thought you said evil for a moment.
That's a whole separate question. That would be very responsible. But legal personality, so you could then attach, for instance, insurance obligations to them.
Yeah.
That's one potential way around. Some people argue very strongly against this, but it's something that's been thought of.
They call it artificial persons.
Yeah.
Will these machines always tell the truth?
If you build exploration functions within a machine, you're inviting the machine to take creative approaches out of its own will. Yeah, those are the famous neural network programming, deep learning. Yeah, and many of the problems that we have today when we program machines under that kind of discipline, deep learning, is that at some point we don't know at which moment the machine thought it understood how something works and it considered it a learned something.
Do you think, James, Adriano, quickly, we don't have very much time. I wish we had hours on this one. Do you think a machine will, therefore, going by what Inma says here, will never, ever tell a lie? Even if it is to save itself?
I think with my one of the really interesting things to me about this whole field is the extent to which it actually raises new questions in the humanities. Because there's lots of hard scientific questions, but with my social studies hat on, I have to ask, what is truth and what is a lie in a whole range of contexts. It might be, did X individual of this identity walk through this doorway? That's quite difficult, one would argue, to lie on. But there's whole range of evaluative decisions where what is truth? So much of our evaluation is based on emotion. So then an interesting question is, will there be perhaps emotional reasoning from the machines, and how do they take into account?
Right. But if a machine knows it's going to be switched off because it made a mistake, it might say it didn't make that mistake.
And that's a big,
if it knows it's going to be the end of itself.
Absolutely, and that's a big problem on AI safety or artificial general intelligence, which is something beyond AI. And there's this big problem about how can you put a switch on-off in the machine, and how can you make sure that the machine doesn't break the switch so it cannot be turned off.
This, I wish we could talk for a great deal more. I wish we could talk for a couple of hours. Maybe we will. But thank you for sharing your thoughts with our audience. And thank you very much for watching. I'm David Foster. I promise you, this has been Roundtable. Goodbye for now.